Hey everybody, welcome to the Lunch and Learn video series. I'm your host, Dr. Josh Packard, the Executive Director of Springtide Research Institute. Ellen Connick, our head writer, is here with us too. As you know, if you've been following along with these, we're spending one lunch digging into each chapter of the newest book, Meaning Making, the 8 Values That Drive America's Newest Generation, that Ellen and I worked on together. And just sort of want to take this moment as, you know, we're clearly having lunch. I'm having a very grown-up lunch of banana bread and beef jerky and hot tamales, because that's, and at my desk, because this is what COVID has brought us to.
Yes.
No, we are here.
We're perpetually snacking. So it could be lunch and learn. It could be snack and convert. Who knows? There's lots of title options. I am having chicken and vegetable fried rice, which is really delicious, especially heated up the next day. I'm a big proponent of the next day things are better than the night you made them for.
I feel that way in my house because that means I get to actually add the ingredients into them that I like. Because like there's a lot of food that I like that my family is sort of like, as Midwestern, they're sort of more tempered in their, like my mother-in-law doesn't keep pepper on the table because it's too spicy. So
that's amazing. That's really, I have a lot of respect for her. She's got some principles.
Yep. And I am the cook and the shopper in our house. So I'm usually making dinners that will, you know, satisfy everyone. But then the next day for leftovers, you know, it's like all the salsa and all the, you know, spices, except for today.
Tamales.
Tamales, yes.
Yeah.
It's almost, I don't know. That feels borderline offensive to be eating something called tamales that are not actually tamales in the middle of an episode about inclusion. But I'm going to table I'm going to table the candy discussion for now.
Another time.
Yeah. Ellen, so this chapter is all about inclusion.
Yes.
You know, we did as Springtide, as we always do, we've got research to support everything, both in terms of like, what are the bigger sort of sociological trends that we're seeing, but also what are some actual data points. And so this chapter is structured in that same way. And, you know, there's one data point that really like, I don't know, hit me over the head as we were, you know, we know 13 to 25-year-olds care about inclusion. In fact, if like, as we're recording this now, we're sort of, I wouldn't want to say in the wake of them, because I don't think that this movement is over, but we're, you know, we've just seen weeks of protests following George Floyd and the sort of ripple effects and ramifications that has had for organizations already across the country.
Yeah. And
of course, we're only a couple of years removed, or, you know, from the height and the peak of the Me Too movement. Which is another point that has affected organizations. In other words, I don't think this is going away. It's being driven by younger people. It clearly shows up here. It's obviously a thing that if you're a leader of an organization that you need to care about. And there was a startling number that came out of our survey that said there were 40% of the young people in our survey, so almost half, said that they would only join an organization if inclusion was among its top priorities. Right. So not as an afterthought, but right up there at the top.
I think that's amazing too. And I feel like in the context, it makes a lot of sense, but the figure alone would be really surprising if we weren't thinking about like, how is this playing out in society at large? How are we already seeing this value be? It's not just like a young person crossing their fingers and saying, gosh, I really hope someday I get to work for an inclusive organization or go to an inclusive school, or like inclusivity is becoming a social value that when it's not implemented in a pretty serious way, it takes it off the table. Like it's a non-starter for young people if an organization isn't inclusive. So it's hugely important. But I think that understanding what inclusivity is really important for organizations to actually know what it would look like then to embody and implement it. It's not like, I think both the examples you just gave about like the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, they could be really poorly handled by just adding a line in a company handbook about like, we are not sexist or we are not racist, but actually inclusivity is more than diversity. And it's not diversity because you can hire diverse people, or you can say, you know, all are welcome outside the, you know, a faith community's building. But if you don't build a wheelchair ramp,
right.
All aren't really welcome, you know, like, so inclusivity is actually about the support it takes and the respect like that it communicates when you invite people in, you mean it in a way that like that person's going to be able to have a really long relationship with this organization, because it's not a token invite. It's a serious commitment to their being a part of this organization, like whatever it takes.
Yeah. And it's such a, like that, it is almost an issue of commitment, right? And this is true for all these chapters, but I think maybe this one more so than any of the others, that like we're highlighting these, they're not intended to be the last word. And inclusion is definitely, obviously there's a whole lot of work that organizations can do with regards to this value. Our job here is to sort of highlight this and promote it as like, this is a thing that young people super care about. It's not going to be like, the end all be all, but that is such a crucial insight that like the first thing to understand about it is that it takes a level of commitment beyond, like you said, sort of saying the right words. And not that isn't important, not that words aren't important, they are, but what these young people were telling us and what we sort of found about what's working is that it goes way beyond that.
Yep, exactly.
So I want to hear some, a big part of the book, as you know, Ellen, is like highlighting these stories from organizations, but it's also about listening to the stories of young people. And this is a big part of what we do at Springtide.
Sure is.
We've got a podcast called The Voices of Young People that the second season is all about having young people respond to each of these values in terms of listening and or reading rather our chapter, and then we listen to how this value shows up in their lives. And so there are conversations just between me and them. And so I want to throw it now to a clip from our podcast episode for this chapter with Abidimalik. And he's in the military, ROTC, he's in college. So he's getting his degree at the same time. And he's going to talk a little bit about why inclusion is so important for him and young people like him in all facets, both in terms of his work and sort of thinking about him as a customer and how he engages with other kinds of organizations and his like personal values and commitment. So let's take a pause here and let's listen to him and we'll come right back.
Okay.
For me, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to train and educate me on specific tasks that they want me to complete. But if they're not willing to spend all this other money that they could on inclusivity, now they've wasted it, in my opinion, because I'm going to go away. But if they do take that into account and say, let's look at this person's faith. What small things can we do? Let's look at this person's, job ambition, because in the military, majority of your training takes a huge chunk during the summer. Now, if you're a farmer, that's a huge month that you're losing that is going to hurt you. And I've seen different company commanders, and this is very common in Minnesota. Some will say, just go ahead and do your family thing. We'll work with you on another way, and we'll have you do some online stuff. And there'll be ones that says, I don't care. We all make the sacrifice, come. And when it's time for that person to sign up again, are they going to sign up? If you said no to them, no, they're going to go away. Or in the other case that they want to be a part of this, they want to continue to do their job because you've shown that you care about them, you're investing them in the long run, and it makes life easier for me. And I personally want to be that leader. When I take my command, I want to be the one that says, I understand where you're coming from. Let me work with you, because I know what it means for me when they go the extra mile. I really look at it from an action perspective. If you look at a lot of restaurants or any stores, they all have the open sign on, and majority of people can walk on during those business hours. But the main difference is when you walk in, are you welcomed or are you just a customer? And so I feel like for me, when I put my presence somewhere and they're giving me this ad or you belong here, etc., I listen, but I'm only looking for the action that they deliver, not their words. So when I see their history of how they've done things, do they have a bad rep? Are they constantly having all these different programs that are helping so many people within the community? And as far as their employees, do they give them opportunities for education, things that matter to them? Is it part of being included within the government, the company's goal? And when I see things like that, that speaks volume. And I want to be part of that organization like yesterday. Where in the other case, if it's not, I just want to, buy that cup of coffee and say, I'm never coming back.
Okay, that was awesome. I mean, to be totally honest, I love all the Voices of Young People podcast episodes. like binge listenable. But one of my favorite insights from this young person, like, how is Abidimalik so articulate?
Right.
But he says, I want to be part of that organization like yesterday. Like that, I think that's, that really sums up for me the intensity of this value in the life of young people, that they're like, if you're not doing it, I don't want to be a part of this. If you are doing it, I'm all in. Like I'm here with you. This is something I already get, and you're doing it, and I'm here to support that. I just love that.
And I think in this landscape, like where we're at right now, I don't want to be crass and talk about discrimination as an opportunity, but there is a moment here where not every organization is committed to these values the way that he's talking about. And if you are one of them, you can get people like him to come and work for you, or to volunteer for you, or to shop with you, or whatever. And so like that is essential to the future of your organization, and to like building the sorts of things that our world needs.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like it isn't an opportunity it sounds like a crass way of putting it, but the truth is, like, if you believe your work is important for the world and you want it to have longevity and for it to survive, like this youngest or newest generation, the one that's emerging right now, the young people who are entering the workforce soon and in the next 10 years, like these things aren't going away. And so this is the future leadership of your company too, you know, or the future leadership of your church, or future leadership of your school. And so I think there's this real opportunity to embrace the values they're already saying really matter, rather than like resist those things until push comes to shove. Like there's this is an invitation.
So one of the things that's happened, and the reason why this shouldn't be surprising, and why there's no reason to expect that these trends would continue, and is in part when we look at the demographics of the country. So I think it would be an absolute misnomer for people to think that only non-white people care about diversity. That is 100% not true. That is certainly not what our own survey findings show. And yet it is also the case that for people who occupy a minority status in some way, shape, or form, whether it's religion, race, or something else, it does hit more personally for them than it would for somebody like me, right? Yeah. And as the country grows more diverse, and there's no reason to expect that that's going to slow down at any time soon, there's more people walking around who have felt this at a granular level, as part of their, as part of who they are. So like when you point out like, oh, he's really articulate about this, which I agree, like it's amazing when we find these young people who are so thoughtful about these values. And also I'm like, well, he's been living with this every day, right? Yeah. He can talk about it the way that I can talk about coffee or something that is just like, I live with this every day. I can tell but for him, like this is real, it's daily, it's ongoing, it informs and shapes his decisions. Ellen, as you were doing the sort of research for the case studies, what are some things that organizations can do then or are doing that are really effective here?
Well, I feel like one of the spaces that's a really interesting one to try to translate the value of inclusivity into, or inclusion, is the religious sphere. And at Springtide, we care a lot about religion and young people, and we understand religion really broadly as these impulses that drive young people toward meaning, connection, identity formation. So, but oftentimes I think people feel like there's this litmus test, or this kind of like, there's a barrier to entry for churches and synagogues and mosques, because there's creedal commitments, or there's rituals that if you don't know exactly how to do what everyone else in that room is already doing, it can feel like the opposite of inclusion. And it can feel like you're an outsider, even when you're trying very hard to become an insider. Yeah. And so I think that this is actually like one of the more interesting things that I happened upon in doing a little bit of research and thinking about how organizations can embody inclusion in particular. So I found this organization that I think is doing really cool things and innovative things. And it's led by a young person. And this speaks to exactly what you were just talking about, Josh, that people who are already experiencing the need for this in really concrete ways are going to have some of the most innovative responses to implementing it. So MakeSpace is this organization that they say they're reimagining Muslim spaces. And one of the reasons for this is young people who were trying to practice their Muslim faith were showing up to mosques and not necessarily feeling like that was the expression they were most comfortable with, but also not having what we call third spaces where they could otherwise find ways to express their religious identity, and their faith and their questions and doubts and what have you, all the facets of religious longing and belonging. And so they call themselves an inclusive, welcoming, relevant hub it's in Washington, D.C., for the Washington metropolitan area Muslim community, with a strong focus on youth and young professionals. And I just think like, this is really cool. Like they're saying, we don't feel included necessarily when we show up to the really formal, rituals and gatherings, but we still want space to explore religious identity. And I think this is actually happening across religious traditions, that young people are like, well, that's not quite working. I don't know how to participate in that. I don't feel totally supported or totally welcome because I don't know everything, when I first walk in. So instead, there's these really creative and really cool, third spaces. That's kind of what are coming up.
Creating a space in between the formal and home. That's what a third, it's not work, it's not home, it's a third space, right? Years ago, I wrote a book called Church Refugees, which was research-based about, it was only limited, it was exploring this concept of people who were done with organized religion, that it didn't really exist. So we started with the lowest hanging fruit, which in this country is Protestant Christians, and exploring those who, they didn't disaffiliate, they didn't not claim their identity, they just said, we don't want to go to church anymore. And it was really interesting to see the variability. That phenomenon is happening across lots of religions, and there have been other people who have done follow studies, but the diversity of religious belief and expression among that group, where I think so often we would paint them with a broad brush, or in this case, like we even just did this COVID study of during stay at home of young people in the first few weeks of stay at home orders in March of this year. And it was surprising to me, like there are people out there like looking for these opportunities, looking for these guides. And so often the guides just aren't showing up. So it's really great to hear about places like MakeSpace where, for the people in my study about church refugees who are like, there's nobody here who wants to support me. Or for the people that we saw in the COVID study, the young people who were saying like, there's nobody checking on me, right?
Yeah.
But these organizations, there's an opportunity for organizations like MakeSpace to emerge and be the solutions that we need to give people that sort of guide, because nobody wants to do this work alone, right? Like nobody, just because you're not opting into an organization and you're saying like, that's not, I don't feel included over there, it doesn't mean that you want to just like strike out by yourself.
Yeah, or that you're not still interested in these questions and these traditions. Like you can be interested in them. And one of the things that actually really stands out to me about MakeSpace is that part of who they're targeting, who they're catering to, are young people who, like often young people's religious questions are not super formal yet. Like they haven't articulated all of these questions or doubts. And there's insecurity, there's self-consciousness, there's like, I remember even being like an actual kid and being like, do prayers only count if your hands are together? Or can,
right.
there's all of these things you don't know. And also you don't know them. So you just are like watching other people participate in a system. And that's why I'm super excited about this, this way that religion and spirituality are shifting, because when it's outside the bounds of a system, we can ask different questions or feel free to say, do your hands have to be together? I don't know. Like that, let's start asking these kinds of questions. So yeah, I'm excited because go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's a really great like model for even how we extend this, so that example is from the religious space, but you heard Abidimalik talking about, in this case, the military, but any employer invests, you got to hire somebody, you got to train them, you got to onboard them, et cetera, et cetera. And you heard him say like, if I don't feel included here, I'm not sticking around. So it doesn't mean that they won't come, because, at some point, if you're a for-profit organization, like everybody needs a job, right? But that doesn't mean they'll stay. Like the next offer that comes along that's as good or better from an organization that does embody those values, or maybe even worse, like we had young people tell us they would take less money. to go to work for an organization that was inclusive. So what can people do, whether you're running, a place like MakeSpace or the military or, a business or whatever? We've got some of these in the book. One of the things that I've always been a big proponent of when you feel like you're not reaching a group, is to think about who should be showing up but isn't, and start going and listening to those people. In other words, like who fits the demographic of your ideal employee or your customer or your volunteer or whatever, and like why aren't they coming? In fact, I was working with a church a few years ago, and they said, well, it's in a quickly growing metropolitan area, and they said, well, our numbers have only dropped by like a couple of dozen members over the last few years, so we feel like we're pretty much holding steady. And I was like, no, the population has increased like 15% here in the last decade, and you're barely holding steady. You're dropping in terms of your impact and influence. And here, I was like, so in other words, I said there used to be a whole lot of families, people, young people, old people, whatever, who would have otherwise come here in years past who aren't now. And you got to start listening to them and finding out why.
That I think that's like number one, not only for this value, but for any value, like is listening first. Is like, you have to do a kind of like stock check. Are the people in your organization, whether young people or people who've been around in the organization for a long time, newcomers, etc., do they feel valued, respected, accepted, encouraged to fully participate? And fully participate is a really important part of inclusion, because again, it's not tokenism. Like, it's not, you're here, you count, but please don't speak up,
Right.
And I think you have to be willing to have a really honest conversation with the folks who are there to give you like really sincere feedback, but then also to go to the periphery or go to the kind of margins of who might not feel welcome. Like if I step back and look objectively at my organization, at my school or my, workplace, who can I think of that maybe doesn't think they belong here? And then why is that? Doing that kind of introspective work about, you can do that for yourself, but you can also do it for an organization. There's kind of this conscience check, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Listening both internally and externally for people in blind spots that, we all have them. Everybody's got blind spots. So I think just coming to terms with that and understanding it. And I'll toss out one more resource on race in particular. Our social media director, Marta, has put together this amazing resource. You can find it on our blog at springtideresearch.org, using this incredibly diverse research advisory board that we rely on internally at Springtide to make sure that, that we're not, as best we can, that we're not succumbing to our own blind spots. And they helped us put together a variety of things from their own faith perspectives and backgrounds and the work that they do, to be a part of, to be an important advocate, to be an important voice. And so that's a great resource. I would highly recommend that people check it out.
That's a really good idea. We can leave it in the comments below the video.
Absolutely. Well, Ellen, anything else we need to say about it? There's a lot more to say about inclusion, but people have people have 30 minutes for lunch. Anything else they need to know right now?
No. What you need to know is, if you need to know more, it's in this chapter in meaning making.
That's right.
There is a lot more to know, but it's an important one, and it's something that every organization needs. And that if you don't have it, you'll get written off easily.
Written off. That's exactly right. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks everybody for watching. And I hope you catch the rest of the episodes for the other chapters of meaning making. You can find the book at springtideresearch.org, right on our website, and we'll be happy to ship you a copy. Bye-bye.
Bye.